Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about. My guest tonight is a repeat guest, Arnie Panitch, nicknamed Creole Arnie. And he's been on a number of times, and each time it's been a delight. And my viewers have said they like Arnie, so that's why he's on again. And he'll be on again 34 more times before the year is out. Thank you, Creole Arnie.
Pleasure.
Thanks for coming on. You're always a delight to have on. He's also a fellow humanist. That's another thing we've got against him. Of course, as you know, I'm a humanist, and I always brag about it or complain or something. So this show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon, USA area. And we talked about how we're feeling right now to check in. Now, the show consists of two major segments, as you know. In the first segment, the Who Are We segment, I talk with my guest a little about who they are personally, so that we might get a bit of an appreciation of why they say what they say. In the second segment, we will talk about the title of the show, Selma, The Quest for Voting Rights in America. And if things go the way they usually do with Creole Arnie, it's going to be a delight to talk about the title of this show. Okay, you ready for the first half of the show, Mr. Creole Arnie?
You bet.
All right, and if I were to ask your best friend, who is Creole Arnie, what would your best friend say? Creole Arnie is what?
I would say I'm an activist, a reformer, progressive, and comedian.
What would be?
Would be. Well, I tell jokes.
I know you do, and you do a good job.
Thank you.
So that's what you say, but that's what your best friend would say?
Probably.
Okay.
Hopefully.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Detroit.
Detroit. Does that still exist?
Detroit still exists proudly. It's a fine French city, Détroit. It means the Straits. I don't know if you knew how French that place really is. It's almost as French as New Orleans.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
May 24, 1941, the same date as Bob Dylan.
Okay.
You know why?
Why?
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
He's also a singer, too. Did you know that? Yeah. You ready for your first trick question?
Sure.
Why were you born?
Why was I born?
I asked you the question. Don't ask me again.
Why was I born? Because my mother was ready to have a baby.
No, there's more reason to it than that, Creole Arnie. You have such depth to you.
That's all I can come up with.
All right. Anything significant about your national, cultural, or racial heritage worth mentioning?
Oh, sure. In 1913, the Panitches arrived Ellis Island, victims of a pogrom in Ukraine. They had an advance party that already had been moving into Chicago, so they went to Chicago, 1913. So we are Jews, and we're immigrants. First generation. My father, I'm second generation, born in USA.
What particular branch of Judaism, what kind of Jew are you?
Well, there's kind of three kinds of Jews, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, and Sephardic, depending on kind of your history of where you are in the world.
Sure.
So we're Ashkenazim, and I was raised as a conservative Jew.
And you're a humanist today?
I'm a humanist today, but I'm still a Jew.
Oh, okay. And your formal education?
Universities in Michigan, public universities, social work. I have a master's. Spent time in Oxford in England.
Mm-hmm.
Spent time at Ohio State. And always learning.
Still learning?
Of course.
Yeah. And what did you do to earn your keep? What did you do for a living?
I taught social work, sociology, community organizing at University of Illinois in Urbana, Illinois, and at Boise State.
That's a number of years, huh?
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
About 25 total.
When did you retire from working?
Where? When?
When?
Yeah.
About how long ago was that?
Well, I had
roughly?
some businesses too.
Uh-huh.
So the university job was 1994, about 20 years ago.
Uh-huh.
But then I had some businesses that kept me going until I really fully retired and moved here about 2003.
Oh, 2003.
Yeah, I moved from Boise, Idaho to Portland, Oregon.
You want to comment about those businesses or let it go?
One was called Boise Tour Train because I had a summer tour business. We had a tram on the streets of Boise, Idaho that gave city tours. Because as you know, do you know the three most important things about being a professor? June, July, and August. Those are three wonderful things to
Because that's
be a
when you don't have to
professor.
work no more.
So I had a summer business because I was bored.
Uh-huh.
And then after the professors, I had a laundromat and dry cleaner. I was in the laundry business.
You're
And
all over the place.
I got a CPA, cleaning, pressing, and alterations.
Never mind.
I got a business card to show you.
This is how it's going to be the rest of the night, I warn you. Yeah. So you're engaged in any business activities nowadays, or you're just goofing off?
I am on the dole.
Mm-hmm.
I have a wife that has just retired now as a registered physical therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So she's kept us alive. But otherwise, I'm in the pension mode. And I let the younger people contribute to my well-being.
I want to ask you an unscripted question. Before the show started, you were talking about not being in the 21st century with all the electronic gizmos and cell phones and all that. How come you don't have any of that stuff?
You know, I have a telephone. We have a landline.
Yes.
I don't want to be bothered with a telephone when I'm out of the house. There's nothing that I need to get in touch with. There's nothing I need to do to communicate with the outside world other than myself and the outside world. The other thing is, so since everybody else has one, if I'm at the bus stop, I just say to the guy who's standing there, the 25-year-old, when is the bus coming? And he punches it up immediately. He says, well, the bus is in 6 minutes.
What do you do with their children and grandchildren and all those folks? They'll say, Grandpa, how come you don't have a cell phone and join this 21st century?
Well, they're only 2 years old.
They're 2 years old?
Yeah, but we Skype.
It's coming. You Skype?
We Skype on we have a computer at home. My wife fixes it up. We Skype.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you're not totally...
No, and they send pictures on the internet.
Uh-huh.
I do use the internet.
You don't even have a flip phone, do you?
No.
Oh, man. Okay, I'd withdraw the question. Okay.
I'll tell you another reason.
What?
Some good American working man wired my house up for that phone.
Mm-hmm.
And these folks move into a house now and they don't even use it. We used to have one outlet, in a house, usually in the dining room. That's how I grew up. And it was a big hoop-de-doo to line up to talk on the phone and all that. I got jacks all over my house, and I got phones all over my house. And these people will move into a house and not even use that technology. It's in your house. Give the working man a break. You've wired up that house, and there's no use of it.
All right. And you talked about my usual question I'm going to ask you anyhow. I know what the answer is. Do you have a a wife, a husband, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or you?
I have a wife.
You have a boyfriend?
I have a wife.
Okay, and that's all, huh?
I have friends.
You okay?
You know.
And what does she think of you?
With my wife?
Yeah.
Oh, we've been together a long time.
Tell her what you think of her. Look in that camera and tell
Oh,
her.
I love her. Barbara, I love you.
Never, that's enough. You got my crew laughing in the control room. And would you care to make a comment about your political persuasion, or you're a tree bagger, or what?
My political persuasion? Progressive.
Progressive, huh?
Activist.
Uh-huh.
I'm not a member of a party.
Aren't you a Democrat?
I am not.
Uh-huh.
I don't vote in the primary.
You got to be a member of some party, Republican or Democrat or what?
No. I'm not a member of anything.
Uh-huh.
Independent? Is that a party?
In some places it is.
Not, well, I don't, I get letters from everybody.
Uh-huh.
Dear fellow Oregonian, you know, join the Working Family Party.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Right?
That's a good one.
Okay, is that a good one?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll read their message next time.
You're going to send
But
them
I
some
don't
money?
give money either. No.
Next question.
I give money to causes,
Uh-huh.
but
Like what?
well, I'm a member of organizations.
Okay.
Americans United for Separation of Church and State,
Uh-huh.
American Civil Liberties Union.
Mm-hmm. You're a card-carrying member.
I'm a card-carrying member of the Portland Art Museum. I'm a card-carrying member of the Historical Society.
Are you doing some walking tours around Portland? This is Portland, Oregon area and Hillsborough.
Yeah, I did some research, and I do walking tours, and I also do a lecture about Lair Hill and the Italian and Jewish period in Lair Hill neighborhood of the immigration at the turn of the century.
Lair Hill is in Portland.
Lair Hill is in Portland. Do you know where it is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's for the viewers around the world so they'll know where you're coming from.
We're international here?
Absolutely. You'll be seen in Timbuktu. And
Well, it's just adjacent to downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the area was urban renewed in the 1950s. It's called the South Auditorium Urban Renewal District. So I talk about the old neighborhood and the new, what's there now. A lot of high rises. They dug out a lot of area of neighborhood for freeways.
Uh-huh.
They displaced a lot of people. So I talk about all of that.
Yeah. And you did that for a while. You're still doing it?
Yeah, I do it once in a while. I don't charge.
What do you get out of it?
What do I get out of it?
Yeah.
Dr. Don, I'm
What?
a professor. Anybody that'll listen to me for an hour brings great pleasure.
Yeah. That's why this show is only for an hour, because we have to stop you. You'll go on and on forever. You also MC our programs on the Sunday morning Humanist of Greater Portland.
I
here
have been
in
doing that for a long
Portland.
time.
And
Yeah.
You're a delightful MC and
Thank you
leader
very
of our
much. Thank you.
Sunday morning groups. And you don't pick on me as much as you used to. I appreciate
Well, that's
that.
good.
Yeah. Persons from the past that you particularly liked or look up to. Any names come to mind? I noticed you got something on the table here.
This is Mohandas K. Gandhi. Mohandas Gandhi, there he is, who's called Mahatma Gandhi because he's the soul of India, Mahatma Gandhi.
Uh-huh.
And Martin Luther King went to his place of residence in 1955 and got inspired by him. And I'll be talking about him in my prepared text of the lessons Martin Luther King learned from Mohandas Gandhi.
Mm-hmm. So Gandhi and King were two people that you admired or look up to. How about Jesus?
I'm a Jew.
I know.
I don't know Jesus.
Well, I'm not a Jew, and I admire Jesus,
Oh,
and
good.
I admire
Okay, well,
King and Gandhi and a whole bunch of other folks.
All right, well, that's fine. And maybe He's a popular guy.
That's what I mean.
Right.
If
They
you
got
don't
a
like-
holiday name for him. Anybody with a holiday must be pretty good.
That's it. Okay, we're gonna name a holiday for you, Creole Arnie. Okay, so how about we take a little early break and then we'll come back and talk about the subject for this evening's presentation.
Sounds fine.
Okay, Mr. E. Let's see if they got it. All right, we are back, and thanks for staying tuned, and thanks for that shot of the Mahatma. For your viewers who missed the opening of the show because you were channel surfing or something, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don, where I interview interesting people like my friend Creole Arnie Panitch about who he is and what he'll be talking about, the subject of the show, Selma, the quest for voting rights in America. And we were talking about this before we started the cameras rolling, and I guess Arnie will be talking about the movie Selma and other things related to voting rights.
Correct.
So I have a couple of questions I want to ask you to sort of set the stage in my mind, and then we can go into what your format is. Is that okay?
Sure.
Does the term voting rights mean the right to vote? Voting rights, does that mean the right to vote?
Yes.
Now keep in mind that our viewers are all economic classes and intellectual level and like that, so do the basic stuff.
Right. Voting rights means the right to exercise your choice of government leadership, your choice of bond indebtedness, your choice of taxation, your choice of a lot of arrangements between yourself individually and government. It also means those lists of voters are the jury pool. If you don't vote, there's no jury of your peers. So voting rights has a lot more to do with civil rights as well as just picking candidates. Okay?
So citizenship responsibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So imagine in the segregated era, you're going to go into school to learn about government, and then you can't participate. It doesn't equate. So it's been of interest to me. How do you decide that we're going to have second-class citizens, and who are they going to be?
And I bet most people don't even realize how important it is, really, to have the right to cast a vote.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they don't exercise the franchise.
Okay.
You know? And if you don't vote, how can you complain about anything?
And how can you say you've got a democracy if you're not participating?
Particularly. And as you well know, if you create a vacuum, power will mount elsewhere. Instead of it being with the people, it'll go somewhere. So.
And those people are waiting for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about the right to vote being so important. Has there always been a quest for voting rights in America? Has that always been the case?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. People wondered, why can he vote and not me? And then they did something about it, and I've got a history to talk about.
Okay. You talk about the history of the right to vote in America. The March for Voting Rights for blacks / African Americans, and I say that because some of us have different preferences, whether we want to be referred to as blacks or African American. I prefer blacks or Creole because I'm red, white, and black. And we're going to talk about the march in Selma, Alabama in the 60s. And you were seriously involved in voting and voting registration, that sort of thing, in the North rather than in the Deep South.
That's correct, in Detroit. I was in the civil rights movement in Detroit.
In the civil rights movement, what does that mean? Say a few more words about that.
I was a member of Detroit Corps, Congress of Racial Equality, headed up by James Farmer. We had a Detroit chapter. And for 2.5 years or so, while I was in graduate school at Wayne University in Detroit, I was a very active, angry, committed civil rights worker while I was in college.
Have you been a liberal or lefty all your life?
I'm not sure what I am as far as left, right, center, but I'm a reformer. If I see something that isn't right, I want to do something about it. And it has to do with equity, and it has to do with fairness, and it has to do with equality. Out of my life experience, I grew up as a, son of a mother and a father who worked in factories. We didn't have anything. Lived in a two-family flat, which we happened to own and got rent from the tenant.
Sure.
And I saw what this country afforded to me because I later learned maybe some of it was white privilege. That other people weren't getting the same opportunities, and I didn't like that.
Well, say a few more words about white privilege.
White privilege. In my neighborhood,
Yeah.
I never saw a Mexican, a black person, Arab American buy a house in my neighborhood.
Really?
In Detroit, Michigan. They were steered away into other neighborhoods. That's not right. We had redlining of insurance and bank loans. We had segregated schools where these ghettos were crunched together, and that's where all the African American or black kids or the Mexican kids in another neighborhood went to school.
And this is in the North.
Of course. In Detroit, where you think of it,
yeah.
Chocolate City.
Yeah.
Not in the 50s.
So
I didn't like that.
We've come a long way, huh?
Yeah. And we protested the AAA because they wouldn't hire black people. They wouldn't insure black people. Their cars, their houses, whatever their insurance needs were. And we picketed the phone company because they wouldn't hire people. We picketed department stores because they wouldn't hire people.
So most white people have no idea that they were privileged and that they didn't have to endure those kinds of discrimination.
I would say they knew, but they didn't care. I mean, if you're a white person, you are the recipient of the largesse.
Well, that's a privilege.
That's a privilege.
Granted by birth.
Sure. And I think it's probably even more dramatic in other parts of the country. But I saw that, and I didn't like that. When I went to university, they had all kinds of segregated policies that I didn't like at all.
At the university?
Yeah. I'll give you one example. At Western Michigan University, you had a dorm card, and it said W, N, or O, check one. And that dorm card would then tell the administration your roommate would be W, N, or O, white, Negro, or Oriental. I put C, Caucasian. And even with my name, they didn't know if I was Caucasian or colored or what I was. I got to university in Kalamazoo, Michigan, in the north. I had no roommate till they looked at me. In the second year, that was eliminated. People like me.
How'd you get to be the way you are as an activist? Your dad, your mom, or your brothers and sisters, or what?
I don't know.
What happened to you?
I think it was because of insults. If I dated a minority at university, Western Michigan University, in 1959, if I dated a black girl, her mother and father and my mother and father would get a letter from the dean.
From the dean. Oh.
Did you know your child was dating a person of another race?
You're serious.
1959, Michigan. I didn't like that. Sophomore year, people were walking around arm in arm on the campus, 1960. No problem.
You've been a busy little bee, huh?
So those are some examples of. Also, we had a Woolworths in Kalamazoo. And when those kids were in Greensboro, North Carolina, sitting at that lunch counter, we saw that on television. We said, that isn't right. We'll go down to our lunch counter and we'll put up a picket. Because black people could eat at the lunch counter. Or they may have had some designated tables, but they served you. And so we did things like that, just spontaneously. I don't remember there being any name of an organization. A number of us would just go to the dean and circle around his desk and start talking.
You actually did that. Yeah. You're mischief maker.
This isn't right. About the dorm card, they said, well, the parents will show up and Billy Bob will get out of the car from Dearborn, Michigan, which is all white, segregated, Henry Ford, and they'll see that he's got a black roommate, and they'll get back in the car, and Billy Bob will go to another place. And we said, fine. Let him go.
You have brothers and sisters?
I have a brother, Fillmore, and he's 2 years younger than me, lives in Washington, D.C., and he's not very political, an activist. So.
How come it didn't take on him and it took on you?
I don't know.
Why Gandhi, of all people, that you look up to and respect so much?
Nonviolent social change.
Nonviolent social change.
Yeah. And just with his little ragtag bunch, he took on the English Empire, the British Empire, and threw them out. They called it the Quit India campaign. And I made a pilgrimage to India as a delegate on the trail of Gandhi with Dr. Arun Gandhi, his grandson, who was recently here during the Martin Luther King celebration. And Arun Gandhi took us to all these sites, and I really learned a lot.
You learned a lot. How did you feel going to all these sites?
Well, it was very inspiring to see how he organized and what he organized and what the processes were. And England quit India.
One man.
One man, yeah.
I love that movie. I've seen it 4 or 5 or 6 times.
Sure. Sure. So I'm quite impressed with him, and he said that the power of, and essentially the power of people is greater than the power of capital. And he said the more you get arrested and go into jail, the more expensive it is for the establishment.
Comes down to the dollar.
Yeah, and stay in jail. Don't bail out. Stay in jail and don't bail out. And that's what they were doing in Selma, too.
Did they ever throw you in jail?
Of course. In Detroit.
You're proud of it?
Well, I don't know. It did.
Did you stay overnight?
I did. I got bailed out the following afternoon. It wasn't intended. We had nonviolent sit-ins, where they'd say, move along now, and if you don't move along, we're going to arrest all of you. But I didn't want to get arrested. I got arrested for a conspiracy to injure and defame. We were picketing a family, a grocery store that had kept killing black kids over cupcakes. We were picketing them. But they lived upstairs, and we'd come and singing We Shall Overcome at 9, 10 o'clock at night, in a dark corner. One of those neighborhood grocery stores.
Oh, yeah.
So they had a inside guy. They put a cop inside our organization. They got the mailing list, and they went right to my house.
They was doing it even then, huh?
Yeah, they did it to me. And there was a police car, and they knocked on my door and said, "Come on with us," in my apartment when I was in Detroit, 1964. That was the only time. I got my mugshot, and I got fingerprints and all that, and it was dismissed.
Yeah, but you're on record. They still got a file on you?
That's a badge. No, they actually sent me a letter that said, "We have no record of this guy." After a year or so, they don't want to bother with keeping records.
Okay, Arnie. We better move along to the subject. Be sure we have enough time to talk about what we're about, Selma.
Sure.
And the right to vote. Will you lead now for a while?
Sure. So we've always had the issue of voting rights. And our country decided to have a constitution without any reference to voting, to leave it to the states. And the states had decided really basically two things, that it would be white men, it would be people who declared taxable income, men, white men, and white men who owned property. So white men who owned property and paid taxes had the right to vote. And by the Civil War, all white men could vote in the United States.
Why didn't they want other people to vote, other human beings to vote in America?
They thought that this was a right, that other people were less than eligible.
White privilege even then?
Yeah. So you have a series of movements to bring in other people other than white males.
Yes.
Mostly Northern European, Northwestern European white males. And so you had a pushback with different rules on how to vote, how to get eligible, okay? So I'll give you some undesirable groups. A religious test. If you weren't Protestant, that was a problem. So Catholics, Quakers, and Jews were particularly not eligible to vote, okay? Even men were not considered fully capable of voting in the United States.
Was that statutory or just unwritten?
No, it's statutory in states.
Of course.
Okay. So you had to go through a series of federal amendments to tell the states what to do, to give them direction. And they said in 1868, if you were born or naturalized, you can vote. If you're native born or you're naturalized, you can vote as any white male, or any male, white male. 1868, just after the Civil War. Race, color, servitude, the 15th Amendment in 1870. And it was written mostly because of a problem in Mexico with, in Texas with Mexicans. They said race, color, and servitude should be eliminated in the right to vote. And that was the 15th Amendment in 1870.
To the Constitution?
U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
In 1920, the 19th Amendment, gender. Women have the right to vote in 1920. Abigail Scott Duniway, Susan B. Anthony, people like that, these women, suffragettes, Jane Addams.
That was just a short time ago.
However, a lot of the younger states like Oregon and Washington and Idaho and Wyoming enacted it into their state constitution when they were declared a state. Wyoming was the first one. You think of Wyoming, wow, how conservative is that? Well, there were a lot of strong women in Wyoming that were running the place. They could vote.
Really?
Yeah. So that was the 19th Amendment. Then we have the 23rd Amendment. What are we going to do about Washington, D.C.? And it wasn't until 1961 that they got their full right to vote. What are we going to do about people who fail to pay taxes or the poll taxes? There were poll taxes, you know. So we had the 24th Amendment in 1964 that said you still have the right to vote. Then there was age. Well, should it be 19, 20, 18, 17, the same as the Army? What should it be? So we had to have a law about that. And so it's 18. That's the 26th Amendment of 1971. Now, what about U.S. military or citizens living overseas? Do they have the right to vote? The federal government had not made a decision about that. So you had a mishmash of what rights people had when they were in the military or living abroad. In 1986, they had the Absentee Voting Act. Took care of that. They had laws passed for Native Americans' right to vote. There's a whole history of the Indian American rights to vote. We still have some other issues that haven't been solved yet. What happens to prisoners?
Yes.
5.9 million felons can't vote.
What do you think of that?
It's a tragedy. That's what I think of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the government hasn't done anything about it. And the states have a variety of laws depending where you are. 2.5% of voters are these people in the country. And then lastly, homeless. Do you need an address? And the bill passed in 2002 said you don't need an address. Mm-hmm. You can just declare on the day of the vote. So we have this whole history of gender, race, class, ethnicity, religion, all because the founders of the Confederation never decided. They left that up to the states. States' rights. And when you hear states' rights, even today, people will say, oh my gosh, they're still going after all the minorities. They're going after poor people. They do all this voter ID. You got to have a driver's license. You can't vote if you don't have your card with you. And it goes on and on and
Who's
on.
the they you're talking about? The people
Government
in power?
people, government people who don't want to have a universal franchise and who are put in power by people who believe that. And so, you see, Australia and other countries have mandatory voting.
Yes.
Everybody has to vote.
Uh-huh.
We don't do that.
What do you think of that idea?
I don't think it's a good idea. Why should you mandate that? I mean, it should be something you want to do.
And what's the alternative? If you don't mandate it, then you don't have democracy.
The alternative is you get 30% in the voting booth like we do. You know? So maybe it is a good idea. I don't know. I don't know if the United States citizenship would go for it. You know? But I mean, that's the conundrum about voting. There's a lot of issues. And we've tried to solve them in our own way, the best way we can. Okay, so can I talk about Selma, Alabama?
Please do.
So we had a situation where we had a civil rights movement in the 60s that had several streams. It had public accommodations, like can you go to a restaurant, can you go to a gas station, can you go to the bathroom, can you drink from a drinking fountain? Can you go to a rest stop? Public accommodations for minorities. And then you had a housing right movement where can you live where you want to live if you got money to buy a house without discrimination instead of being steered in a neighborhood that has been predetermined that you'll live there. And then there was this voting issue. So a number of organizers picked out this town called Selma. And for 3 months in 1965, there was one heck of a lot of emphasis on the Queen City of the Black Belt on the Alabama River.
The Queen City of the Black Belt.
The demography is, in 1960, 28,400 people. In 2013, 19.9. They've lost population. They've lost maybe a third of their population. Mm-hmm. The population is still about the same, 80% black, 18% white, 2% Asian, Native American, and Hispanic. 31% live below the poverty line, and the average income today, $21,000 $21,261 per family. $21,261 household income. The black people, who are the majority, 80%, since 1901, have been paying poll taxes and having to endure literacy tests for voting.
Why poll taxes? What's that mean? What's
that means you're gonna pay a fee.
Yeah, of course.
And you're poor. You can't pay it.
So that's the way. A lot of people can't afford that fee, so they don't get a chance to vote.
Right. I've never heard of anybody around the north, around here where I've lived, having to pay anybody to vote. Imagine that. And the other thing is the literacy test. So I say to you, Dr. Don, and this is what they did in Alabama, how many counties are there in Oregon? Name them. And you're standing at the window.
I've heard some of those stories. Unbelievable.
Name the amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Start with the first one. And go and stand there and tell right now. Well, that resulted in, of the 10,000 eligible black people that vote in Selma, Alabama, in 1960, 300 voters out of 10,000 age-eligible people.
So they were successful, they being the powers that be are the ones who make these kinds of determinations.
Now this goes along with separate but equal, which is, of course, 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, segregated rail cars, segregated, and that's where they got the idea for the following: schools, housing, job discrimination, segregated theaters, you know about that.
Oh, yes.
Segregated churches, segregated buses, segregated restaurants, segregated social clubs, golf courses, swimming pools, beaches, and any violations were met with beatings and arrests. Okay? So you've got an enforcement as well as a philosophical basis in 1960. And all of this will result, of course, if you can't vote, you can't be on a jury. And I want to invoke O.J. Simpson. O.J. supposedly killed his wife and Ron Goldman.
I believe they did.
In Brentwood.
Yeah.
And Robert Shapiro got that case, and he said, wait a minute now. Jury of his peers, Brentwood. The court is in Santa Monica. And Robert Shapiro said, the jury of this guy's peers is downtown. And he changed the venue, and he got some black people on the jury, and that jury exonerated him.
If it don't fit, you must acquit.
Exactly. Now the next thing happened when he got sued for the civil damages, and the court went to Santa Monica, and he got a huge judgment against him, guilty, in Santa Monica.
In the civil suit.
In the civil suit. So a jury of your peers, even today, you can see how that's important for a guy like O.J. Simpson, who said if they can get some black people on a jury, maybe he's got a shot. That's just a diversion, okay?
Yes,
jury of your peers. And is L.A. a northern city? Considered northern? I mean, I don't know. All right, so in 1963, Bernard Lafayette and his wife, Cola Lafayette, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1963,
SNCC,
organized SNCC in Dallas County Voters League in Selma, Alabama, Dallas County Voters League. And that particular year, they got the public library to integrate. That was a really big success for them. And in 1964, because they were organizing and they were rattling around and they were trying to assert their rights, there was a local judge, James Hale, that said nobody can have more than 3 people at a rally for civil rights. And in the town, there were at least 41 named civil rights activists, and they were getting arrested all the time because they were violating this rule. They were getting beat up by James Clark, the sheriff of Dallas County. Arrests, they were getting intimidation, they were getting fired from their jobs, they were getting fined. It was a mess. So this went on in 63 and 64, and Dr. King said, you know, we're going to make a move here. We've got other issues, but we're going to make a move here. We got our 1964 Civil Rights Act, and we're going to make a move on voting. So he went and visited Selma on January 2, 1965. He spoke at the Brown Chapel AME Church, was where they met, did a lot of the organizing. And his group is called SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and SNCC, and they merged in what they called the Voting Rights Campaign. And they started sending in people to vote, to register. And 3,000 people were arrested and jailed.
So these people who went in to help with the voting from the North?
Mostly they were, I think they were indigenous at first.
Uh-huh.
And they went door to door and said, go down and see if you can vote. And they knew that the people were going to get arrested. That's part of Gandhi. Tax the system. Get arrested. Make them feed you for, don't get bailed out. Make them feed you for a month. Make them send you to the state prison, whatever they're going to do. But plan that you're going to have some intimidation. You know, and somebody's going to get hurt, and somebody's going to get fired, and there'll be police brutality. So the next thing happens is one of their workers got killed, Jimmy Lee Jackson. He was murdered in nearby Marion in a cafe, shot. And so James Bevel, who was one of the organizers, he organizes the march to Montgomery. He's with King, SCLC. And
Montgomery,
they go up
Alabama. Montgomery, Alabama.
to Montgomery.
Yeah.
50 miles on US 80. And on March 7, 1965, they tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Now, I should tell you that I have done a lot of civil rights touring. And within the last 2 years, I have gone from Selma to Montgomery, spent time in Selma, spent time in Montgomery, went to all the museums and all the markers and all that other stuff. And so they put 600 people on the streets that day. John Lewis was out there in front.
Congressman John Lewis today.
He's Congressman John Lewis. And they try to get over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and that's where it goes from city over the bridge, and the Alabama River becomes country. At the bottom of the bridge were the police, and they said, don't come any farther. And they said, no, we're moving. And you saw it that Bloody Sunday. And the whole country saw the CBS show. So King, he wasn't there that day, but he came on the 9th. So there was Sunday, then the 9th is a couple days later. And then a second march, and he turns everybody around up on the top of the bridge when he sees the police are still going to bloody them. And he prays with them. And he's got a lot of clergy now, and he's got a lot of white people. And he's got nuns. And they're going to beat the living daylights out of even nuns. So he files court protection orders for March, which were granted by the federal judge, Frank Minnis Johnson, Jr. He went to the federal court in Alabama. And he consulted with President Johnson, and the governor, whose name I forget right now.
Wallace?
Yeah. What's his first name?
George
Wallace. He says, I can't protect the people all the way to Montgomery. So Johnson federalizes the National Guard. That's an administrative job. Federalizes them. He says, I'll protect them.
That's a Trump.
That was a Trump. So on March 21, they start the march with 3,200 people going to Montgomery, Alabama, on US 80. They walk about 8 miles a day. They sleep in the fields. And in the front row is Rabbi Abraham Heschel, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, Greek Orthodox Father Iovakis, and Roman Catholic nuns. And they make it all the way. And when they make it all the way, they arrived on the 25th. And guess what? There were 25,000 people that entered Montgomery, Alabama. 3,200 started. Okay? So.
We got about 5 or 6 minutes.
Okay. In 1966, a year after that, 11,000 black people were registered in Selma. Aha.
What a difference.
12,000 white voters and 11,000 black voters. Sheriff Clark became Sheriff Wilson Baker. In 1973, the at-large city council went to 10 districts, and in 1973 there were 5 whites elected and 5 blacks elected, and today there's a black mayor George Patrick Evans in Selma, Alabama.
So that march was a success.
Exactly. Now let me make just a comment about this movie, Home of the Brave.
Mm-hmm.
This is Viola Liuzzo. She was the only white woman that was killed in the movement. And she was from Detroit. Viola Liuzzo said, "This is everybody's fight." And I knew her.
Uh-huh.
And Viola...
You knew her?
Was a student at Wayne State. She went down there in her 1963 Oldsmobile with those beautiful Michigan license plates and was hauling people around because she had a car, staging, getting them at the airport, picking them up, taking them back, staging people that may have didn't want to walk the whole way. She was giving rides. And a car pulled up next to her with 3 KKK in it and an FBI guy, and there were 3 guns shot, and she was killed on the road at night going west back to Selma with a 19-year-old boy, Leroy Moten.
Yeah.
And he faked that he was killed and just laid there, and they inspected it and made sure she was dead, and then they left. And those guys all were caught. But that was just an example of brutality that happened, and they made this movie about Viola. She said, this fight is everybody's fight. And she had a funeral in Detroit on the 30th. She was killed on the 25th, and on the 30th of March, 1965, she had a funeral at Immaculate Heart of Mary Church in Detroit. I was there, and Martin Luther King was there, Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, James Farmer of CORE, James R. Hoffa, because her husband was a union representative. Anthony Liozzo was a tough Teamster organizer. Walter P. Ruther was there from the UAW-CIO.
Yeah.
And a few weeks later, after she's buried in Southfield, Michigan in Front Lawn Cemetery, there were cross burnings on her front porch, as if to say that she was the N-word lover.
Yes. I can say the word nigger lover.
You can say that. Now, the movie pretty much shows all of that.
You got a couple of minutes left, Rio.
I got just about enough time.
Okay.
The movie shows all of that, but there was one of Lyndon Johnson's aides who wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post on December 26, 2014, named Joseph Califano. He was the assistant for domestic affairs from 1965 to 69, and he claimed that the movie did 4 things wrong. It falsely portrayed LBJ being at odds with Martin Luther King. 2, he accused the movie of falsely using FBI to discredit Martin Luther King. He said that the movie accused LBJ of being reluctantly behind the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and he said the movie accuses Johnson of being opposed to the Selma March itself. He also said then, in support of LBJ, Selma was Lyndon Johnson's idea. Now, I've laid this whole thing out. I never mentioned Lyndon Johnson. He said Lyndon Johnson organized the whole thing. The Voting Rights Act was LBJ's greatest achievement. LBJ viewed MLK as an essential partner, and LBJ never used the FBI to disparage Martin Luther King. Well, there are books about that.
Yes.
But that's what he said. And what he said that Califano said that Lyndon Johnson said, show the country how unfair it is in the Deep South, and quote Lyndon Johnson, pretty soon the fellow who didn't do anything but drive a tractor will say that's not right, that's unfair, and then I can shove this Voting Rights Act through Congress. King did meet with LBJ on February 9 and told LBJ about Selma, and at the time he told him that there were 10,000 voters and 335 were registered. George Wallace told LBJ that the National Guard could not protect the march, and so LBJ federalized the troops. And he then intoned to a joint session of Congress on March 15th, before the march, and we shall overcome. Remember that?
And we shall overcome.
Right. And that's
He
a joint
didn't need
session.
to do that.
He didn't need to do that at all. So Califano says that the movie was a little bit disingenuous. Califano also said that there are more than 3 strikes for Selma. Strikes meaning you're out of it. Therefore, it should not get any awards. He said that LBJ and Martin Luther King were partners in the march and that the Voting Rights Act was Lyndon Johnson as well as MLK's idea. And he said, quote, "The film's director felt no obligation to check the facts. They thought it would make a better story." But he says, if you want facts, go to the LBJ Presidential Library website, and that LBJ was enthusiastic about voting rights. Joseph Califano, December 26, 2014, Washington Post.
Did you like the movie?
I loved it. I thought it was well done.
Well done.
Yeah.
And
I was
remember
happy about it.
when I cried when Lyndon Johnson said that on television, and we shall overcome. Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite an emotional time for everybody.
Look at that camera and have one final word for the viewers out there about what we had here this evening on this show and what we talked about. Take about 20 seconds or so.
Well, the result is black mayors, black congressmen, black governors, and a black president. Who would have thought all of that? And now they say in the South there's still some segregationists and some folks that have sour grapes and that they're trying to keep minorities from voting. But look at the results of how many minority people are in Congress.
And it's getting better and better, and we're going to need to stop now before my director yells at me. Yes. Any PSAs we have time for, Mr. E, please. To learn more about the American Civil Liberties Union, go to that website and learn about the ACLU and join it to protect our remaining civil liberties that are in jeopardy nowadays with the way our government is moving. Anything more? End corporate personhood. Go to moveToAmend.org so we can show that corporations are not persons and money is not speech. And thanks for watching, and remember KFC, and I hope you enjoyed Arnie as much as I did. Not that KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable to you too. And you too.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.